So, of course, this is going to be a very special episode for me. Since we're talking about the career and legacy, and I know it sounds cliche and thrown around like 1,000 times as far as that word, but um, what Kobe left was absolutely incredible. And just the example that he set for the generation moving forward. And for those who happen to be watching on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to my page, Von Resper Jr. And of course, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content if you happen to be watching. And yeah, so like I said, this is definitely another one that I really felt the need to to really share. And so of course, last week I talked about Magic Johnson. So so of course with this one, I'm talking about another Laker icon. I mean, this guy is one of the top two along with Magic, and that's none other than the Black Mamba himself, Kobe Bryant. And so I would say that Kobe was to the Staples Center what Magic Johnson was to the Great Western Forum. And it's not an understatement. That's just absolute fact. But to get a great understanding of of Kobe's journey at that point, we definitely have to have an understanding of of his genesis, his origin story. So of course, Kobe was born August 23rd, 1978 in Philadelphia. What I mean, and so of course, um, basketball was literally in his DNA because his dad was Joe Jellybean Bryant, who played for the Philadelphia 76ers most famously. So of course, Jellybean wore number 23, and he was teammates with with Julius Dr. J. Irving. So of course he later went on to play for other teams as well. And all and of course of course eventually when I said of course eventually during Kobe's childhood, he spent a lot of his time growing up in Italy. And so and the reason why was because was because his dad was playing basketball in Italy at that time. And so so of course that was when when Kobe really got his taste of the game. And so growing up, you know he was enamored by the Lakers. He was a big Laker fan because of his Laker hero at the time, Magic Johnson, as and not only with the Lakers, but also he was certainly like any other kid at that time. Those that were Generation X growing up in the '80s. He was especially drawn um, by certain certain rising superstar coming drafted out of North Carolina, going to Chicago, named Michael Jordan. And just so happened, that it's like and like I said, especially guys like that, those were the type of players that Kobe really gravitated to. What I mean? Those are the guys that he really clung to. And so and also like I said, growing up in Italy, that's when he really like I said, that was the genesis of his love for the game, his taste for the game of basketball. And even growing up there, there like I said, even growing up there, he played a lot of basketball over there as a kid. It was, like I said, exposed to the game, exposed to a different culture. Like I said, he was definitely multilingual. And it wasn't until 1992 where his family moved back to America, mainly to Philadelphia. And so that is when that's when he started high school, and he went to high school at Lower Merion. So that is where originally where, let's say, sort of like the legend of Kobe really started, at Lower Merion High School. And there he was a man among boys. He was in a league of his own at that time, and to the point where he led that team to a championship. And so, because of his rising status, rising stature at that time, like I said, he definitely had Philadelphia pretty much in the palm of his hand, especially when it came to high school level. And so when it was time, and so Kobe bet on himself to the point where he decided to declare um, for the NBA draft, and instead, so he decided to forego college and go straight ahead to the draft. So he's one of those guys in the era, along with the likes of Kevin Garnett, Tracy McGrady, and others, who bet on themselves and decided to go pro. So uh, going and thing about it, the thing about this was that going into this draft, there were a lot of options, a lot of speculation. There definitely certain teams that really wanted to go for him. Charlotte Hornets, who eventually drafted him. The New Jersey Nets. I think the 76ers might have been in the cards as well. But but ultimately, I think the thing is, Kobe's mind was already made up. Eventually, he wanted to play in that gold and purple, that purple and gold, of course, with the Lakers. And a side note, as of this recording, I'm actually wearing a purple Kobe shirt, Kobe Grinch shirt. By the way, I want to give a shout out to the Forest Lab as well, because it's a really awesome shirt. You know what I mean? So, like I said, I just say a little cheap plug with that one. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, of course, back to the story. So, Kobe gets drafted 13th overall by the Charlotte Hornets. And so, of course, we already know how this whole story, how this played out, and so, of course, Jerry West, being the basketball genius that he's always been, was, I think he was like the scout at that time. And so he, and the thing about Jerry is that he was absolutely an amazing negotiator, you know what I mean? And so, so of course that summer, he orchestrated an incredible trade, as he traded Vlade Divac and some other pieces or whatever to the Charlotte Hornets for Kobe, because Jerry wanted to make room for the largest shark in the free agent aquarium, Shaquille O'Neal, coming out of Orlando. So with Vlade Divac out the way, that, like I said, that definitely made room for Shaq. And so when you have a once in a lifetime talent, superstar like Shaquille O'Neal, if anything, why would you still have a guy, with no offense to Divac, but with a guy like Shaq, why would you really, still need any extra room for a guy like that on the team? We have the Diesel right there. So that same summer, Jerry West orchestrated a draft trade to trade Kobe's rights from Charlotte to the Lakers, where we could officially live out his dream of playing for the Lakers. And of course, at the same time, that same summer, he's certainly able to orchestrate Shaquille O'Neal's deal to join the Lakers, because of everything falling apart in Orlando and so on and so forth. So that's a whole nother story. So with that being said, and of course, obviously, we all know hindsight is 2020. So we already know, looking back on it now, clearly Kobe, clearly Kobe is far and away the biggest name throughout the entire draft. But coming out the gate, he wasn't, because of number one, the answer himself, Allen Iverson, being drafted to the Philadelphia 76ers, Kobe's home team, Kobe's hometown. So, I think that really, really lit a certain fire under Kobe. So that anytime you play against the 76ers, it was, he pretty much had a target on them. Anytime they'll play against them during the regular season, So, of course, at that time, like I said, Iverson was on a whole different level from Kobe and just about everybody else at that time. And so, because Kobe didn't get that college experience and everything like that, because of that, he really had to grow up faster. And so, I'll say like this, it was certainly somewhat of a humbling process, if you will. And it was just a reminder, to Kobe and everybody else, that they still had a lot of room to grow. And even he knew it himself, and because he knew that he has so much more room to grow. That is what fueled his work ethic. So even though he didn't come out the gate firing all cylinders, in fact, as a rookie, he only averaged like 7.4 points per game. So he was, pretty much putting out, let's say, typical sort of middle of the road, semi middle of the road rookie numbers. Of course, this is at a time where he really had to prove himself, because this is at a time where Eddie Jones was in the starting lineup. And so Kobe, like I said, but at the same time, because of the fact that Kobe was so much of a student of the game, he took that time to really absorb it like a sponge. So, like I said, this was that time where he really had to pay his dues. He really had to, like pretty much climb his way up the ladder. And however, in his second season, he was actually voted to the All-Star game. Not only in the All-Star game, he was actually voted a starter, even though he only averaged like 15.4 points per game that season. And I think if anything, I would say a big reason why he was named not only an All-Star but a starter as well, because of the fact that everybody saw that he would be the eventual successor to Michael Jordan. And see, that's the thing that set Kobe apart from so many other people at that time. That's what set him apart from so many of the other players at the time, that the media was put in that position, trying to put in that pedestal to take over the league, to be the next face of the league after Michael Jordan, be the next Jordan, this, that, and the third. And so with that mantle comes a lot of pressure, and ultimately come a lot of disappointment and everything like that. So there's so many players that they're put into, that were thrust in that position, that just crumbled. You know what I mean? And let me slow down. Like I said, there's, like I said, because they may have like a slight flair, certain type of charisma, automatically people want to associate them as Jordan like and everything like that. So on one end, I would say there were players who didn't want that spotlight. I also say that there were players who felt like that they were deserving of that spot. Like I said, just so many different factors. But Kobe was one of those guys. If anything, he was the main one who had no problem taking on that challenge. And he's, like I said, I'll say it like this: even from that time, even from his second season, before he solidified himself as as a perennial All-Star, a perennial All NBA first teamer, champion, and this, that, and the third. It was that early on that Kobe was willing to take on that challenge of carrying that mantle. I'll say it like this: he was willing to take on that challenge of carrying the mantle in the future, when guys like Jordan faded off the scene. So even though early on Jordan got the better of him, but at the same time, that was Kobe's learning process. That was certainly Kobe's way of growing up faster. To play, to go head to head against a guy that was your hero. You know what I mean? A guy that you just soaked up so much information from, soaked up so much wisdom. And see, because of Kobe's basketball IQ, because of his work ethic, because of his drive, because of his willingness to want to be the best, to want to be the absolute greatest that he can possibly be, to be the best version that he can possibly be, which is what birthed the whole Mamba mentality thing. That's what set him apart from so many of his contemporaries, from your Iversons, your Tracy McGrady's, Vince Carter, so on and so forth. Grant Hill, Penny Hardaway, whatever whoever it is you want to name. And like I said, that his discipline, his commitment, his willingness to study the all-time greats that were like right in front of him, that is what set him apart from so many from so many others around him, to the point where the gap started to get so wide that it was almost, dare I say, in some case, almost laughable at times. So I would say that the genesis of that sort of greatness really started at that time at that point. So this is at a time where the Lakers were starting to rebuild, is at least starting to come out of that sort of dark ages from that post Magic Johnson period, or whatever. And so and at the time, of course, at the time, they certainly had a nucleus with potential from not only Kobe himself, especially when it came to Shaq, Nick Van Exel, Eddie Jones, guys like that. But it was just something where they couldn't really get over the hurdle. They couldn't really get over the mountain, because you had teams like the Utah Jazz, especially the San Antonio Spurs, who eventually become the NBA champions. And so, well, of course, not of course in '97 and '98, the Bulls had become champions. But in terms of their competition in the West, the Lakers definitely had a bit of a mountain to climb. And in 1999. Not only did they lose to the Spurs, but they got swept by the Spurs, and so that was sort of like that. I would say that was like the breaking point. That was the pivotal turning point for them as a franchise, because after that, Dale Harris had gotten fired. Phil Jackson was his replacement, and so right away, the Lakers made an instant turnaround, and Phil was able to bring the best out of both Shaq and Kobe, and he was able to bring something out of them where they could be the very best that they could ever be. Certainly Shaq got himself into the best shape of his career. Because that was certainly a proven ground for him, and so Kobe brought into that philosophy, that system. And pretty much he wanted to find out uh, whatever it was that made Jordan great in Chicago, because now that Phil has gone from Chicago to LA to become his coach, he was looking to find whatever it was that Phil did to help to help make Michael even greater, and so if anything, if anything, I would say that that was certainly the perfect transition for Phil to go from Jordan to Jordan's successor. You know what I mean? And so right away things just clicked. So the Lakers went on to have a 67-15 record in 1999 2000 season. So Shaq might as well have been the unanimous MVP at that point, and Kobe was certainly entrenched into becoming Shaq's sidekick at the time. So even though he had made the All-Star team back in '98, it was at this time where it was certainly becoming more of a turning point, where Kobe started to really solidify himself as a true perennial All-Star starter. So that season, he averaged like 22.5 points per game, and of course, because he was the perennial quintessential sidekick at that time, with the capabilities of being his own leader. Because of that, he was certainly a great compliment to Shaq in terms of that 1-2 punch, dynamic duo, Batman and Robin type of thing. So it was like a rebirth of Showtime. So Kobe was to Shaq what Magic was to Kareem, and it certainly showed within this season. And it's, especially with the way that the Lakers, just absolutely dominated the competition, whether it was the Jazz, whether it was the Portland Trailblazers, Sacramento Kings, San Antonio Spurs, all the way to, of course, eventually defeating the Indiana Pacers in 6 games. And so, and like, and yes, it's so and so even though Shaq was was obviously the unanimous Finals MVP, Kobe was very instrumental in that, even to the point where he had to play through pain, whether it was an injury to his foot or injury to his hand, or things like that. Like Kobe showed that he was an absolute warrior. And so after that, we go into like I said, of course after that, We go into the 2001 season. And this is at a time where, as Pat Riley would say, this, the disease of more slowly starts to creep in. And so at this point, Kobe's production just rises. You know what I mean? So even though he wasn't fully in his prime or in his peak, but he was really coming to his own more than ever before. And this was a season where he was starting to make more of a statement that he was capable of becoming the future leader, in the event that Shaq were to decline, retire, whatever the case may be. Kobe was showing that he can be his own alpha male, alpha level player. And so, and the thing about it was that his production improved gradually, like significantly to the point where he averaged like 28.5 points per game. He was directly behind Shaq when it came to scoring. And so, even though the Lakers regular season record took a bit of a dip, it finished like 56-26, but at the same time, when it came time to when I'll say it like this, even though their regular season numbers started to, kind of took a fall, but when it was playoff time, they took everything up to a whole nother level, to the point where they had the Lakers 2001 Lakers playoff run is absolutely all-time historic, because during the playoffs they went an unprecedented 15-1, and so and like I said, as far as the Lakers in the playoffs that season, they were absolutely merciless. They took absolutely no prisoners. You know what I mean? They were bloodthirsty. You know what I mean? And so all throughout the playoffs, they had nothing but sweeps. And so and they just absolutely victimized whoever was in their way. Then we get to the NBA Finals, and they go up against league MVP and scoring champion Allen Iverson. One of Kobe's greatest dance partners, if not his greatest dance partner. And so, so I would say this finals series was certainly very personal for Kobe, because of the fact that he saw a guy like Allen Iverson become a star in his own hometown. Iverson was getting so much of the lion's share of the popularity. Like I said, Philadelphia truly became Iverson's city at that point. And so this series was certainly a proving ground. And so this was Kobe's way of planting the flag and letting him know, like, look, you're not the only, like I said, you're not the only sheriff of town. You're not the only, if anything, that was his way of making a statement to Iverson and the rest of the league that, you and Shaq are not the only alpha players in this league. I have what it takes to be just as great as you. And Kobe showed it. I mean, like I said, if like I said, he was absolutely phenomenal. If it had not been for Shaq's dominance, no question about it, Kobe for me would have been the Finals MVP. And arguably, you could say, leading up to that point, you might as well have been arguably the playoff MVP. Because of how great he played. Because of how instrumental he was during the playoffs leading up to the finals. So Kobe's final stats, I'll say it like this. Kobe, I'll say it like this. During the finals, during the finals against 76ers, Kobe stats were this: 24.6 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 5.8 assists per game. And so of course, the Lakers absolutely dismantled the 76ers in 5 games. And of course, this is at a time where Kobe was truly coming to his own more and more and more. And then we get to of course So of course, of course, sorry about that. So, and of course, we, of course, we get into the 2001-2002 season. Excuse me. And once again, like I said, Kobe's elevating and growing, and it's it's an even more spectacular player, to the point where he wins his first out of 4 All-Star Game MVP awards, and it just so happens to be in his hometown of Philadelphia. And Kobe was absolutely dominant, even in an All-Star game. And so, so of course he led the West to absolute domination. We scored like 31 points in that game. It was named All-Star MVP, even though the crowd booed him. And the main reason why they booed him was because the Lakers absolutely crushed the 76ers, and the whole world knew that the Lakers were going to win. Even Iverson himself knew that the Lakers were going to win that series. And it was just all about putting up the best fight they could possibly put up, but it was already inevitable who the champs were going to be. And so because of that, Kobe, because of that, Kobe was seen as a guy that was on enemy lines, which he was, and so, but of course, but at the same time, he never let that stop him. And so, what I mean. So because of that, that season he actually averaged like 25.2 points per game, and the Lakers, continue to dominate, and were just absolutely amazing, and, just pretty much, I mean, even though, like I say, even though they're, like I say, perennial contenders, perennial, champions, but that season the Sacramento Kings were actually the number 1 seed. So a lot of people were looking to the Kings to possibly be the champions, up until they played each other in the Western Conference Finals, and that was infamous. Probably the most infamous series in Laker history. Especially when it came to Game 6 and the way the officiating was and everything like that. And so for that series went on to 7 games. The Lakers win by the skin of their teeth. But by the time they get to the finals, it's a completely different story. It showed that the Nets had no business being in the finals against the Lakers at all. And so even though Shaq obviously was the finals MVP, Kobe's final stats were 26.8 points per game, 5.8 rebounds per game, 5.3 assists per game. And so this was like the first season where he made the All NBA first team. And so when it comes to, once again, is I bring the comparisons with Iverson. There was a point where Iverson had the edge, but then by the time we get to the 2001 finals, things became more even. And then by the time the Lakers have the three-peat, Kobe's already, started the separation between him and Iverson. And at this point, Kobe's in his 6th season. He's become like a, so he's become, like a fourth. He's become a 4-time All-Star. And so he's become, he's become the, like pretty much like the premier shooting guard of his era, of his generation at this point. And so during this time, when tension really starts to grow between him and Shaq. So at first, as I said before, Shaq and Kobe were Batman and Robin. Shaq was obviously Batman. Kobe was Robin. By the time we get to this once we get to the three-peat, once the Lakers have completed their three-peat, Kobe's gone from Robin to Nightwing, in the sense of, I'm tired of playing this dude's shadow. It's time for a change. It's time for me to show what I'm made of. It's time for me to make a name for myself, an identity for myself. Much like the way for comic fans, the way that Dick Grayson was sick and tired of being Bruce Wayne's kid sidekick, especially at the point where he outgrew that role, to the point where, especially at the point where it was obvious that he aged out of that position. So it got to a point where Dick Grayson aged out of being Robin, it was time for him to be Nightwing. Same thing with Kobe. You know, early on he was Robin. Um, Once they had the three-peat, he became Nightwing, and it was time for him to establish his own identity. So now, the following season, I noticed that there was definitely a shift, certainly like a drastic change when it came to uh, the way that the Lakers system was run. Because I remember when like I said, I remember early on when the season started, all of a sudden I saw Kobe become the team's leading scorer. Usually it was always Shaq, and so I was always curious as to see what's going on with that. I was like, because a fan like me growing up at the time, I was so used to them, just giving the ball to Shaq automatically. But excuse me, but by the time we get to this 2002, 2003 season, Kobe is on a whole nother level. He's having strings of 30, 40-point games and things like that. And he started to establish himself as by far the best player on the planet. Even though Tim Duncan went on to win his second straight MVP and win his second championship, second out of 5 championships. Even though Spurs won the finals that year, Kobe really started to set himself apart when in terms of being the best player on the planet by far, and also also there was a very pivotal game that season, especially against the Wizards, where he lit Jordan up for 55 points, especially after he heard a comment where Jordan said that Kobe was not fit to like fill his shoes or something like that. And so Kobe being just the forever competitor, much like Jordan, where guys like that hear certain things and just turns a switch on. So when Kobe got wind of what Jordan said, the switch went off. And when it was time to play against the Wizards in LA, Kobe lit him up. He torched him like Jordan had never, ever been torched before for 55 points. So that was very much a statement game for him. And so, so of course, after the Lakers get beat by the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, they start to make changes. They start to, but by the time we get to 2003, 2004, it's just an absolute whirlwind, like just a dark cloud all over the place. So unfortunately, during that summer, that's when, when everything happened in Colorado and all this type of stuff like that. And so that was just a complete cloud over Kobe's head, a distraction, when it came to his personal life, professional life, and everything like that. Also, simultaneously, the Lakers, had signed aging veterans like Karl Malone and Gary Payton, thinking they were going to create like a big four, super team at the time and everything like that. So, so this, at the same time, the Lakers, like I said, we're absolutely performing, let's say, fairly well or whatever, and like I said, they're certainly firing on different cylinders. Kobe was still making the All-Star game. I think he had gotten another All-Star MVP, like co-MVP with Shaq that season as well. But eventually, the Lakers met their match against the Pistons, where the Pistons not only beat them, but they absolutely stomped them out. And so that was, and by that point, like I said, everything reached its breaking point in terms of Kobe's relationship with Shaq. And like I said, it just got to a point where they could no longer coexist. They just reached a breaking point. And so, so eventually the Lakers organization was met with ultimatum: either keep Kobe or keep Shaq. And Kobe really reinforced that himself. And so eventually the Lakers management, Dr. Buss, rest in peace, of course, decide to go with Kobe. And therefore he traded Shaq to Miami. And so so of course, and the reason why that move was critical, why it was pivotal, was because of the fact that Kobe had a greater upside than Shaq, even though Shaq was a more dominant player. But if you're talking about in the long run, Shaq was soon started to go on a decline. His body was already starting to break down on him, things like that. I know he was at that point he started miss a lot of games because of injury. So he really started letting himself go at that point. And so, so of course, Dr. Buss really saw the greater vision, the greater picture, and saw that you could really get more out of your money for Kobe than you would for Shaq. However, the Lakers went through growing pains at the time. With Kobe as a newly appointed full-time leader, apart from Shaq. And so so like I said, that first season was really a bit of a blur to me. I think a lot of people as well. And so they briefly had like Rudy Tomjanovich as their coach, and they realized, all right, you know what, it's time to bring Phil Jackson back. And so of course, by the time we get that to 2005, 2006 season, Kobe really just went off and just went to just an unseen level like never before. That season, he was on an absolute scoring rampage. And so of course, there was a game where he had 62 points in 3 quarters against the eventual Western Conference champion Dallas Mavericks. And of course, the most famous game, the signature game of that season, was the legendary 81-point game against the Toronto Raptors. And so, like I said, and that just added to Kobe's legend. It just added to his mystique. And the thing about it is, especially when the Lakers were down at that point, they were down like 15, and all of a sudden, Kobe just carried the team on his back. Like I said, it was unprecedented. And like I said, that's an iconic game, especially for this generation. For those who never actually saw Wilt Chamberlain score 100 points, this was the closest thing for them to that. And like I said, that was absolutely an amazing game. Even I couldn't believe it. So because of that, Kobe averaged 35.4 points per game, a career high. The first time he had ever led the league in scoring. And so so for me, I would say, and the biggest controversy about that was the fact that Steve Nash won his second straight MVP. Even though I feel like Kobe should have won the MVP for that, because how valuable, how impactful he was to that team and just to the league in and of itself. Without question, he was the MVP of that entire league of that time period. It doesn't matter. So unfortunately, the Lakers, get bounced out by the Phoenix Suns, and the Miami Heat win the championship. And so Kobe has to watch Shaq win a championship without him. So the pressure started to mount even more. And by this point, Kobe started to I don't want to say turn a new leaf, but I would say like this: it was a transformation for him. Transformation for him as a player, transformation for him as a man, transformation for him as a leader. So, and out of the urge to want to be even greater than Jordan, Kobe switched his number from 8 to 24. So there's several meanings behind that. One could be because he always wanted to get one up on Jordan, and also you could say that 8 times 3 is 24. So he wanted to become 3 times the player that he was before, and so so of course 2006 was the last season. He had number 8. 2007 season was when he first scored number 24, and he did not miss a beat. And so of course he went on to lead the league in scoring once again. This time like 31.6 points per game. But at the same time, the Lakers fell short in the playoffs once again, and Kobe started talking about a trade, demanding a trade, and everything like that. Very similar to how Magic was talking about a trade. But even when guys like that say trade is actually code for it's time to make other changes. So with that being said, even though Kobe said a trade, the Lakers read that as it's time to make trades with other players. So they traded Kwame Brown and a few other pieces to the Memphis Grizzlies for Pau Gasol, who was a much needed missing piece. Like I said, for Pau Gasol, and also drafting Andrew Bynum. So those are the much needed missing pieces in this Lakers era, in this Lakers sort of post Shaq era. And so this was a time where Kobe really wanted to establish his identity apart from Shaq, and so so of course, that first season with Gasol by his side, Kobe finally wins his very first MVP award, and of course leads the Lakers all the way to the finals. Unfortunately, they fall short against the Celtics, and so of course the critics grow louder and louder about how Kobe couldn't win without Shaq. But then this is where the breaking of day hits. By the time we get to 2008, 2009, all of a sudden, things really just started, like, really just started, sort of like, start to come into play, and it just started to come together.